If you're queer, there's a good chance you're also neurodivergent. The data on that overlap is real, it's replicated, and it's currently being twisted to argue that we can't know our own minds. Neurodivergence and queerness are not mutually exclusive. The most cited explanation is that autistic people identify less with gender norms and feel less social pressure to conform to them, leaving more room for gender and sexual diversity. But how does this translate to our dating lives? In this episode, we're going to talk about how we've all been flirting, dating, and doing intimacy on expert mode, and what we can do about it.
Ooh. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Queer Collective podcast. I'm your host, Carbon.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Frankie.
And welcome to the show. And this episode is sponsored by Field, Beducated, and Tomboy X, but more on them later. And for our guests today, we have Frankie Talon Rose, who is off camera today and is a neurodivergent, mixed-race, non-binary, and queer registered psychotherapist with degrees in social work and sexuality studies. Frankie's here to help us brainstorm how we can work through common neurodivergent challenges in relationships, sex, and dating.
Let's jump into chapter 1, which we're calling the overlap that nobody warned us about. So, did y'all know that queer people identify as autistic at higher rates?
Why is that?
Well, what they have found is that folks who are neurodiverse are less likely to just kind of take for granted the expectations of society in terms of how we should be in the world relationally, in terms of our sexuality, in terms of our gender, in terms of social rules. We're more likely to question them. We're more likely to try to understand why it is we're doing something and not just take it for granted that that's what we do. And so the recurrent research is pointing to the fact that as a result, we are seeing a higher percentage of queerness and transness and or sort of gender fluidity generally in neurospicy populations.
Neurospicy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like it.
I like that word.
Yeah, in the specific receipts from Cambridge Autism Research Center, which is the largest study to date, says autistic adults are 8 times more likely to identify as asexual or other. Autistic men, 3.5 times more likely to be bisexual. Autistic women, 3 times more likely to be gay. And then on the trans and gender diverse side, adults are 3 to 6 times more likely to be autistic than cis adults. That's trans and gender diverse people. And that only counts like diagnosed autistics. So it could be larger. Question for you, Frankie, kind of on that note, with the rise of people self-diagnosing online, do you think this is like positive, potentially problematic? Like, is it important to have a formal diagnosis?
You see that argument a lot these days. And I think where that whole thing came from is that there is a really big sort of rift in thought around neurodiversity where you have the medical establishment who treat and frame neurodivergence largely as a disability. And the medical establishment is very much about you need to make sure you go to an expert to get the correct diagnosis. And so there's a certain amount of gatekeeping that happens. That gatekeeping makes it quite inaccessible to a lot of people to get a diagnosis. But if we look at neurodivergence from a social perspective and from a neurodiversity affirming perspective, it is, to self-diagnose, to recognize yourself in other people, to look at other folks and say, this is who I am and this is what I'm about and I recognize myself. It's a valuable tool for self-understanding and self-acceptance. But that's a perspective that comes at it from neurodiversity is just a different operating system. It's like there's Macs and there's PCs and they both effectively do the same thing, but they do it in different ways.
Right.
So, and that is just an affirmation of diversity as opposed to a medicalization of something as being a problem.
Do you recognize it as a disability? Like, do you feel like autism and ADHD, do you feel like it's positive to do that? Because I think when you recognize something as a disability, then you get supports, right? Like in school especially.
I don't think that we can generalize and say that either of those things are positive or negative. I think there are pros and cons to both. Certainly, if one has the privilege of getting an assessment, and those are often expensive, and often the assessments themselves, I remember when I got assessed, there was a whole series of questionnaires that they were like, just sort of ignore the fact that this is not applicable to you as a non-binary person because these were written for men. Right. So, and you sort of had to do the mental gymnastics in your head to make it fit for you. So I think if you are privileged and have the means and the funds to be able to get an assessment, it can result in a certain amount of social supports in the sense of, disability tax credit or school supports or any of those things. For other people, that route is not desired and they want to come at it more from a perspective of this is who I am in the world and I don't want to be pathologized for the way my brain works.
One thing I wanted to say before we moved on from kind of that overlap that nobody really talks about, of there being more neurodivergent queer people. I really wanted to flag for our listeners that like this research is being used by right-wing people against us. And I feel like that is an important thing to know and be aware of, just so we can continue fighting against that. The way that right-wing politicians are reading it is that autistic people can't know that they're trans. And that is really like infantilizing, you know, and like they shouldn't have access to gender affirming care because they're autistic.
Can't be trusted kind of thing?
Yeah, which is really messed up. And all of the researchers that have like taken part in this, they all speak out against that, as they speak out against their research being used in that way. And they say that like neurodivergent and autistic people should have complete autonomy to make their own decisions, of course. Yeah. But that's something I just wanted to flag because we use that in a big chunk of our opener. And I want people to be aware of how that's being used.
Fascism will weaponize anything that makes a person more inclined to not go along with the dominant belief system. Autists being already willing to step out of that box. People who are sexually free or know themselves gender-wise, sexuality-wise, already step out of that box. And so the constellation of all those things makes us dangerous to fascism.
I like the use of the word constellation there, though. It's like we're all connecting together and have some sort of like front that is pushing forward.
I'd be remiss if we didn't bring up AuDHD before we got into this episode. AuDHD is the community term for both autism and ADHD, and emerging research is showing that this is the combination can have distinct symptom patterns, aka it isn't just autism and ADHD stacked on top of each other. It's kind of unique. Frankie, do you know what's unique about AuDHD?
Well, I will speak from my own experience in this regard. I do have both. Yeah. What I would say is it kind of feels like I have opposite impulses, and depending on the moment, I can have two completely different sets of needs. I've had a partner say to me, "Oh, but you wanted to go out, you know," and then we'll be out, and I'll be like, "I gotta go home," you know, and just like I'm understimulated and then I'm overstimulated, and so I think what I learned was just to get really, really connected to myself, because if I wasn't picking up, my own cues to be able to tell myself, okay, I need quiet right now, or I need to be out with friends right now, or I need to, whatever it is that would help me regulate in the moment.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
I've always felt I have both because I have really high sensory needs, and eye contact feels like my eyes are on fire. And, but I feel I can read people and situations and social things, but I feel like sensory things, I was looking it up, sensory things can also be tied to ADHD.
Yeah, sensory things definitely can be a symptom of ADHD, but also I don't 100% quote me on this, but I believe I read recently that 40% of autists also have ADHD.
Yeah.
So it's a high, and oftentimes we catch the, particularly those of us who are late diagnosed, we catch the ADHD before we catch the autism because the symptoms can sometimes mask each other. Right. So then, I remember getting diagnosed with ADHD and going, okay, this makes a lot of sense. But then I was like, and now there's a whole bunch of other things that don't have an explanation. And so 3 years later, went and figured out the autism thing. Another thing for possibly, our listeners who are a little bit older is that also as we move into our late 30s and early 40s, if we are a person who is dealing with perimenopause symptoms, neurodivergence can actually show up more clearly or get worse because of what...
don't tell me that.
Well, it depends on the person. It depends on the person, but because the hormones are shifting, and already we struggle with sort of dopamine and executive function and all these things, and that gets harder when our bodies start doing wonky things with estrogen and stuff. So something to look forward to.
Chapter 2, Flirting and Early Dating, aka was that a date? Before we get into flirting, can we just acknowledge that every dating and sex advice that we ever got was always vibes based? Read the room, feel the energy, or you'll just know?
Because here's the thing about neurodivergent brains, they do not thrive on vibes.
No.
We like explicit step-by-step instructions, which is exactly why I love today's sponsor, Beducated.
Beducated is an incredible sex education platform with over 150 courses created by the world's top experts. And it's built on the exact premise this episode is about. Sex is a skill. Nobody sits down at a piano and just knows how to play. So why do we expect anyone to be naturally good in bed?
Especially when it comes to things that nobody ever taught us, like queer sex. Instead of guessing what your partner's face means, you get an actual video, tutorials, and practical exercises from direct communication, consent, and confidence to techniques that'll leave your partner going, oh. It's backed by experts, it's educational, and most importantly, it's hot. Genuinely, for anyone whose brain loves a syllabus, this is the special interest that pays off in the bedroom.
And it all starts with a 5-minute quiz that builds you a personalized roadmap to a slower, more pleasurable sex life. No decoding required. It literally tells you where to start.
That's spelled BEDUCATED. Click our personalized link in the show notes or the description and take the quiz to get started. And for the days when nothing fits, not physically, not spiritually, not genderly, the National Film Board has just dropped a hilarious and heartwarming series on this called In the Closet. And it's basically exploring that feeling, but in a way that's actually healing.
Hosted and directed by Adonis Charlie, who fully commits to the bit by literally getting in the closet with 6 of their NB besties.
We're talking DJ Mausner, Shelazan LaRue, Amanda Cordner, Meg McKay, Ben D'Souza. These are all comedians, writers, drag performers, and you know that they're getting up to some hilarious shit.
They swap clothes, unpack identity, overshare, God bless, and somehow make you cry and laugh in under 12 minutes per episode.
They get into all kinds of important fashion and identity topics, such as how does one dress mask sleeves, and what is the ultimate femme top? Spoiler alert, it's a blazer.
Expect queer joy, chosen family, and lots of, yes, actually, I do look hot in this outfit. Catch all 6 episodes on the NFB's YouTube channel and stand along. Go watch In the Closet now or after this episode. I mean, stay here, but go watch it afterwards.
First, I want to get into the ADHD challenges, and then we'll go into the more autism challenges. But of course, you might resonate with all of them. Let's see. Have you ever had someone take hours to text you back? And by hour 2, you've gone from they're probably busy to they hate me, and then should I end it before they do?
Yeah, except I'm the one that's taking too long.
Are you?
Sometimes, especially on social media, I'll take weeks because it gives me anxiety to reply.
Yeah.
So I delay,
Yeah.
and then I'm like, hey.
The experience I just outlined for ADHD people, that spiral can be called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Have we heard of it?
No.
Yeah, so RSD is rejection sensitive dysphoria. It's basically it's not an official diagnosis in the DSM-5, but it is an experience that many neurodiverse folks have within their realm of experience, where rejection feels like crap to anybody.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a nice experience necessarily. But for somebody who is neurodivergent, rejection can feel especially magnified to a level where it can actually feel like it causes physical pain.
This study called I Feel Like a Burden described it so well. It says the response to rejection is often described as a visceral, physical sensation or a sharp dagger to the chest rather than just hurt feelings. And like, I really feel that like my chest feels like it's burning. It feels like it's sinking. I'm like, and then it gets very personal. I'm like, this person hates me. I'm a horrible person. It's like so like, really intense.
And that's where the dysphoria can come in too, because dysphoria is like we're seeing something where our perception of something is not necessarily the reality, right? And so we can go down a rabbit hole of spinning thoughts and rumination, which is also quite common for us. And then by the time we're done, we're in a place where we can't dig ourselves out, and it's an extension of the emotional dysregulation that we already can feel as a result of our neurodiversity.
Things are clicking for me right now because I fear even making plans with friends just out of fear of the rejection. I'm just like, no. I won't even text them because they probably don't want to do it anyway, and I don't want to hear that. So I'm just, I'm alone today, tomorrow, every day. And it's actually difficult. Like I talked to my therapist about this, and I'm like, I don't know why, but I just I fear texting my friends. I just I feel like they're going to hate me. And then that's kind of ridiculous when you say it out loud. But then in my head, I'm like, they don't like me that much. They don't want to do things with me. But then when I actually reach out, the opposite case.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever had the experience of like, when we were talking about earlier about not messaging people back, is that sometimes, a really common experience is that people will put off because they cannot answer in the moment a text or a call or something like that. And then it becomes so much amount of time has passed since that person reached out that the amount of shame that we feel in not getting back in touch spikes. It can cause us to sever a relationship because we actually don't feel like we're able to reach back around after that much time has passed. It feels embarrassing, right? So what can happen as a result of kind of what you're describing in this piece is that, our worlds can sort of shrink a little bit because we become afraid of stepping into any arena that might trigger the RSD.
Yeah.
What do we do about that?
From a therapist perspective, if somebody is ghosting, there is usually a reason why that seemed like it was the best way that they could support themselves at the time. Learning how to support yourself there, I guess, offer a couple of things you could try. So one of the things is mindfulness in the sense of learning how to expand your window of tolerance for experiencing discomfort. So like when the feeling is coming up in the body, can you breathe and stay with it and name it. Naming it can also put some distance in between you and the feeling. So for example, instead of I'm a failure and nobody will ever love me and I'm worthless and I'm etc., to be able to, instead of going down that track, to go, I am having an RSD response right now. Naming it puts some distance between us and it. Staying aware of the feelings as they show up in the body and just staying with them, breathing into them. And if you can give yourself some support, putting a hand on your chest, hugging a pillow, getting a weighted stuffy or something to help support your body through that experience, I think is really also important if you're alone in it.
A listener submitted their experience with RSD. I have ADHD and I find that I get way more easily dysregulated in my dating life since I struggle so much with rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria. I literally ruined my most recent situation because I mistakenly thought he ghosted me after not hearing from him for a day and a half. I have a lot of attachment issues and become clingy and irritable when I start to like someone. I have no problems having patience and grace with friends and family, but something about dating triggers my nervous system so bad. Frankie, none of this sounds very conducive to dating. I definitely experienced this as well. How can someone manage this, like especially in a dating context?
The thing about ADHD and autism as well is that it's the way your brain works, but it's not a fixed sentence. We are still, as neurodivergent people, able to learn skills and able to work on ourselves and able to become more self-aware in order for those kinds of things to not impact our experience as much. It doesn't mean that because we have ADHD or because we have autism, we can't grow or we can't heal or we can't seek out different ways of doing things than we have always done. But it does require a certain amount of commitment to self to be able to say, I am going to work on these things through therapy or through groups or through community groups or through stuff on the internet, or there are many, many different ways that people can get and find support. If you're finding that all of those things are coming up for you, then I would say it's really important that you find some support for yourself because those things are not small things.
I found kind of like DBT skills helped as well, like the opposite action. I'll sit with myself if I'm having a really big emotional reaction. It's like, okay, I'm like, there's a huge emotional response coming up right now. Let's take a step back, see if it is actually like valid. You know what I mean? Like your emotions are always valid, but it's like, is this like grounded in reality? Like kind of like parse out the facts of the situation. Yeah. And then like if the facts do align with what you're feeling, it's like, I think you can still take a pause before you respond to someone, like lower your emotions and respond to it when you're more calm. But I also think I really liked the DBT skill, like opposite action. That kind of has helped me get out of this like really intense mindset where it's like, okay, the facts don't match the situation right now. Yeah. And it can be really useful for me to just be like loving towards this person if I can right now. And sometimes that actually makes me feel loving.
Yeah. No, beautiful. And thank you for mentioning DBT. I was actually going to share that CBT and DBT, they're good for particular things. CBT will give you tools to challenge automatic thoughts. And DBT will give you tools to help with the emotional regulation. And both of those things are, for what it's worth, evidence-based techniques of therapy that that can definitely assist.
Another strategy I've used, I came up with this on my own. Let me know what you think of it. I put my expectations on the floor, especially if I'm going to go up and flirt with someone or ask someone out. I'm like, I'm going up and this person's going to reject me right now. And I'm kind of like, I guess it's like rejection therapy. Like I'm going up expecting a rejection and then I'm going to be yay so surprised if they're into it. Did y'all know that people with ADHD and autism are also more susceptible to experiencing limerence?
Wait, what's limerence?
Limerence is kind of like a rumination on usually an object of desire, i.e. a person. The feelings are usually not reciprocated. With limerence, we can kind of create a fantasy and then buy into the fantasy with such intensity that we're looking for confirmations in the world of it being true, or it can consume us in a way that it interferes with the rest of our life.
The dating app field passionately describes it as pining after someone to the point of feeling like you're spending every waking moment thinking about them, where you live your life in a loop of questioning how they feel about you, and any hint that it's mutual feels like euphoria, while anything to the contrary triggers a full-blown crash. Oh, God. You're so consumed by the idea of them that crush just doesn't really cut it.
Yeah, I just also wanted to add that although definitely it can replicate that idea of like non-consent in pursuit of a mark or of a target. I think for a lot of people too, though, limerence can be an element of, it's not necessarily something that they're choosing. It can, in some cases be a manifestation of hyperfocus. It can, in some cases, be a manifestation of OCD and just sort of like a repetitive thought that one can't get out of their head, or rumination. So it kind of looks like, smells like, tastes like that. And maybe there are elements of that for some people. But I know because of the way our brains are wired, sometimes we're more likely to kind of fixate on something that is interesting and shiny. And sometimes the fantasy too is like it's supporting us by giving us a place to live that feels safer than somewhere else.
Totally. I've had to cut off my fantasizing.
Yeah.
Because I used to see it as like you were saying, this good, this sapphic yearning, so beautiful. But then I was like, whoa, this is taking me to a weird place though. And sometimes you got to give yourself 5 minutes to yearn and shut it down.
Yeah.
I would say it's made me scared of casual dating because I feel like this trait that I have, this kind of obsessive fantasizing about people, it leads to me getting very attached to someone, and then even though it starts out as a very mutual connection, it's the feelings get so imbalanced at a certain point, and then it also starts to trigger the rejection sensitivity dysphoria as well, because it's oh, you're not matching where I'm at. But I don't know, how could someone deal with that?
Well, we can sometimes have a tendency to not quite distinguish between an acquaintance feels like a friend, feels like a partner, feels like the lines between those things sometimes blur for us. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that as long as both people are on the same page. If they are not on the same page, then it can become very painful and very difficult. There's many different ways of dating.
So neurodivergent people are statistically more likely to notice that social scripts are optional.
Yeah.
And honestly, once you've opted out, you need a dating app that is built for people who are going off script.
Exactly, which brings us to today's sponsor, Field. That's FEELD, the dating app for the curious.
And while Field isn't just a queer app, it's absolutely a queer app built by and for the community. With over 40 gender and sexual identities to choose from, 40% of members identify as something other than straight.
But here's the part that I love most about dating on Field. There's no pretending. There's no need to write your profile like a job application and pretend to be what someone else wants. Within the Field community, the cultural norm is to be radically honest. It helps you find exactly what you're seeking. It means no one is falling in love with your mask. They're into exactly who you are.
Go off and write a whole college or university essay in your bio. On Field, communication is key, and it shows.
And there's no swipe culture. You can browse without giving anyone a yes or a no and take your time to make intentional decisions. For those of us who need a beat to process, that's revolutionary.
It's ad-free, completely independent, and full of curious, playful, open-minded people.
Lastly, the Field community is famous for change. From vanilla to kinky and gay to pansexual, Field is a place for you to explore what you really desire.
So if you're ready to date off script, download Field today. That's FEELD on the App Store or Google Play.
It's about knowing what your tendencies are,
Right.
and being able to identify what is happening in the moment. To say, I think I'm responding to this person in a way that would indicate that I'm, that maybe is a little bit more invested than this other person is. How do I feel about that? Do I feel shitty about it? Do I want to change something about it? Am I okay with it being a little lopsided? How does the other person feel about that? Right? And if you don't feel okay about it, then it's like, what needs to be adjusted to come back to a place where you're in alignment with your truth?
Right. And what kinds of things are usually adjusted?
Yeah, well, it depends on the person. It depends on the situation. Maybe it's putting a little bit more space in between reaching out for contact, right? Maybe it's about finding other people to have connections with so that your focus is not completely on this one person. Right.
Yeah.
It's like looking at where do you feel unsupported by the other person? And then looking at what are some other ways to get those needs met.
Those are very good points. I think a few things that I have done do align with that. And it's like redirecting the energy towards something creative because I'm someone who likes doing creative things. And I think that could be different for each person. Like, what are your hobbies? What are your interests? What do you like to do? And I like to kind of like transmute that energy into something beautiful, And that has felt really nice. And it's like hard to break yourself out of it sometimes and like make yourself do something productive instead of like doom scrolling, Sure. Doom scrolling feels good.
Sure does. Okay, so we're talking neurodivergent dating, and one of the biggest audience submissions that we got was that our autistic listeners overwhelmingly feel like they're bad at flirting. How do you pick up on if somebody is flirting with you versus just being nice?
So I'm a fan of directness, and I might say something like, if somebody was trying to flirt with me, I might say something back like, when you say that, it makes me feel like XYZ, fill in the blanks. It makes me feel turned on. It makes me feel like you might be flirting with me. It makes me feel like my temperature is going up. Was that your intention? Because if it was your intention, I'd love for you to continue talking.
Yeah.
If that wasn't your intention, then my apologies. I just sometimes have a hard time reading. Reading.
That's very nicely worded. I've been very blunt. I'm just like,
that works too.
A lot of our listeners were really nervous because they can't read social cues and they're worried that even their directness could make someone uncomfortable too. It's like they're worried like they're not reading, even if someone, I think a lot of consent culture is up to like sometimes body language and like reading people's body language, and it's like some people are bad at communicating if they're uncomfortable.
I think directness is always the best.
We can't be responsible for other people's emotional responses. Once we know, we may not know at first, right? And everybody is allowed to make a mistake, right? So if we start flirting with somebody and it makes them uncomfortable and they tell us it's making them uncomfortable and we continue flirting, then that's a problem, right? If we start flirting with somebody, they say, hey, I'm not really into this, then we could just be like, cool. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Have a great night, So that's not on you. The uncomfortableness is their body telling them this is not right for me right now. It's not a bad thing that you need to avoid.
And it's just like recognizing when someone's not for you, and you can kind of just feel it, and you don't have to be with that person again. You choose who you surround yourself with, really. One of our listeners said that if sapphic flirting is difficult, then autistic sapphic flirting is like extreme mode. But one thing I'd like to propose is that perhaps you're not bad at flirting, you've just been flirting in a second language. Autistic researcher Damian Milton's double empathy problem suggests that communication failure goes both ways. So autistic people may misread allistic people, but allistic people also misread autistic people.
Is allistic people like neurotypical?
Just
people,
neurotypical.
Yeah. research by Dr. Catherine Crompton found autistic people often reported strong rapport with other autistic people, while mixed neurotype pairs struggled to connect. So perhaps you're sending perfectly clear signals. It's just someone else kind of like speaks a different neurotype. But Frankie, how can we apply this to mixed neurotype dating? Like, are those relationships destined to fail?
You could treat differences in neurotype like any other difference that we might have in a relationship. When we get into a relationship with someone, there are things we have in common and there are things we do not have in common. And the success of a relationship has more to do with how do we like honor and make space for and respect each other's differences is way more important than all the things we might have in common. When you're dealing with a mixed neurotype relationship, then the difference, and it can be a very fundamental difference, is in the way your brains work. For the first thing that's important is understanding that. What does that mean? What does it mean to be neurodiverse? What does it mean to be neurotypical? How does that show up for each of you? What are the tendencies that you each have in terms of how you prefer to do things? Mm-hmm. And then not projecting that preference onto the other person. What I often will tell people is, the things that need to get done still need to get done, but maybe let go of attachment to how they get done. Because, otherwise we can fight for days about, you're not doing this as fast as I need it, and you're not doing it in the way that I think it should be done. And, how many people recognize themselves in those? Like, it happens all the time, right? So much. So
compromise.
It's compromise, and it's like, okay, you do things like, a left-handed person is going to do things like this. A right-handed person is going to do things like this. I am not left-handed, so I don't know what it's like to be left-handed, but I'm going to allow you to do the thing that needs to be done in the way that you do it. Right.
I would say when the two of us were dating, and I mean, you didn't realize you had ADHD at the time, but I think our ADHD showed up so differently though. And I was never house trained by my parents. Like, I make like a really big mess. And like when I'm cleaning, everything explodes. I go from one task to the other. And it's just like, the house can be a really big mess. And I think you grew up in a really clean house where your parents like really trained you. And I think keeping things clean and organized is a really good, like even unmedicated ADHD skill. And you kind of house trained me, which was really helpful.
Cultural.
Well, also
So
like
helpful.
being like a person of color, like you can't be a person of color and also be like autistic or weird or like dirty or like, you're already a person of color. So for me, it was like try to be as like good, as perfect as I could be. So I think I just like, I high masked a lot of like anything that I felt.
And I think kind of like the advice that I was looking into for like the neurotypical partner is like trying not to read in so much to like body language and being really open to like very direct communication styles too, right? And I think like fundamentally, maybe if you do have like very different communication styles and you can't meet in the middle, sometimes that's just not meant to be.
All right, so let's talk about sensory issues and overstimulation on dates out in the wild. All right, so everyone close your eyes and picture it with me. You're on a first date at a coffee shop with a cutie that you're really interested in. You're trying to flirt, but the milk frother keeps going off. You can hear 3 different conversations around you that are also blending into the music, and the overhead lighting is shining right into your retinas. Your date thinks that you're losing interest because you can't form a proper sentence, but you're actually fighting for your life.
Yeah, I've been there.
Your clothes suddenly feel itchy and too tight, your heart is racing, and your body is overheating. What do we do?
Yeah, Frankie.
So relatable. Oh my gosh, that happened a couple weeks ago. When you know overstimulation is a problem, one of the things I would do is, well, there's a few things. First of all, I would see if you can do a little bit of research by way of introspection to notice what are your body cues when you're starting to get overstimulated. Because what can sometimes happen is we start to feel really uncomfortable, and then we try to mask and push through it to pretend that we're not really uncomfortable. And that just, that usually ends up being exhausting, and we might get,
so drained.
That was very, very tiring. Yeah.
Yes.
So first of all, you want to know what are the cues that you're getting overwhelmed. If you know that, sort of high sensory environments are really difficult for you, then I would plan your dates accordingly. So there are a million things to do in Toronto or wherever you're listening from in terms of cute quiet dates, go to a library and whisper in a corner, sit in somebody's backyard and have a picnic. There's a lot of, if you get really creative, there's a lot of things you can do that kind of reduce the environmental stimulation so that you can focus on your conversation or getting to know the person, because that, I'm sure, for a lot of people in and of itself is stimulating enough. You're with somebody who's giving you butterflies, you have a crush on them, you're nervous, you're this and that. So you definitely, I would stack it in your favor by reducing anything you don't need to focus on. For people who are like dating a lot of people or dating regularly, what I would say is at some point, you ever get to the point where you've been on, a whole bunch of dates in a couple of weeks, and then you're just kind of feeling drained, and the idea of going out on another date is like, I just can't do that. So every single person is going to have a need for some recoup time or alone time to rebalance all of that social energy they're putting out. So notice what your balance is and make sure that you very consciously put in days where you are dedicating energy to yourself or being quiet or being alone or whatever you feel like sort of rejuvenates you in the opposite way. Helps you re-regulate.
Absolutely. I found the date idea that works really well for me is I really like doing like parallel play kind of things because I find, I don't know, and I think people have also found it cute. I'm like, why don't you come over or we go to the park and I'll bring my collage stuff and we can collage together. And then it looks like I'm really good at planning a date and I'm taking charge, but actually I'm just controlling the environment.
Great idea. Great idea.
So it kind of like is a win-win because people like when you plan a date. So bars, restaurants, and coffee shops are all sensory hostile. The lighting's unpredictable. There's 4 conversations and they're all happening on top of a milk frother.
You know what else is sensory hostile?
What?
Underwear. A waistband that digs, a tag that itches, an underwire pressing into your ribs for 6 hours. If my environment is already at capacity, my clothes cannot also be attacking me, which is why I genuinely love today's sponsor, Tomboy X.
Hell yeah. Tomboy X is queer-founded, queer-run, and queer-designed. And you can tell. As an ADHD person with real sensory needs, this is the only underwear where I feel like I'm wearing nothing at all. Not itching, nothing digging in, which frees up so much processing power for, the actual date.
And every bra on Tomboy X is 100% wire-free. Your headphones are wireless, your internet's wireless, your bra should be too.
Here's the other thing that my fellow hyperfixators will get. When I find the item, the one piece of clothing that my body accepts, I need it in every color immediately. Tomboy X understands us. They have 12 different silhouettes, 3 different fabrics, from thongs to boy shorts to 9-inch briefs in so many colorways. You can keep your comfort ritual and get your novelty fix.
They design with the whole community in mind too. Sizes extra small through 6X across premium underwear, bras, swim, and loungewear, and they're B Corp certified, meaning that they meet the highest standard of social and environmental accountability.
And if your sensory system is skeptical, fair. They have a love at first wear guarantee. If these aren't the most comfortable underwear you've ever worn, they'll either get you a pair that is or give you your money back. No questions asked.
So head to tomboyx.com and use code QUEER15 for 15% off at checkout and tell them Queer Collective sent you. Okay, so dating can reward neurodivergent people for masking, which is definitely a thing that happens a lot, and then punish them the moment that they stop, the moment that they unmask. So question for Frankie, what does it mean for autistic and ADHD people to mask?
So masking, as it is affectionately known, is when we either consciously or subconsciously suppress our natural traits and the traits that come along with our neurodivergence. So this can look like, suppressing our stims. It can look like social scripting. It can look like forcing eye contact. It can look like hiding the fact that we're totally sensory, like overstimulated. And we're doing that in order to blend in with a neurotypical, quote unquote, way of being out in public. The thing that's important to know is that it's not necessarily a bad thing It's an adjustment that we have had to make that keeps us safe, that helps us to not be rejected often in social situations, that helps us to keep employment. It can help us in a lot of different ways. So I would just avoid sort of thinking about masking as something that is bad. As we feel more safe, we will naturally unmask.
What do you think that it is about eye contact that makes you feel like you're burning at the stake?
It's an interesting question. You know, I'm actually not privy to the science behind it, but you know, I'll hazard a guess. Like, eye contact is pretty intimate and it's pretty intense in the best of times, you know, neurospiciness aside. So I would imagine that we just take it in like on steroids, like it's just extra intense to a point. We feel everything more intensely, and that can be stuff that's difficult, and that can be stuff that's pleasurable, but you know, things can be so pleasurable they're painful also.
If you don't look at the eyes, where do you look? I can tell you where I look.
I mean, I can tell you where I look. Yeah,
right at your boobs.
I'll usually just put my eyes in soft focus, or look at somebody's forehead, or look at somebody's nose. So I'm sort of still looking in their direction, and I look like I'm still paying attention, but I'm not taking in as much intensity from the eyes as I might be if I was looking right at them.
Here's my key. I always look at the mouth. Because it's the source of where the sound is coming from.
It's a great idea.
Even if like there's distracting sounds around me, I'm looking at the mouth and I'm like reading the lips, and usually I can still catch the sentence.
That is what really burns me out, I think. Like, I'm really overthinking it, and sometimes I can't even engage in a conversation. Usually I'll just look away, because that's how I can process a conversation.
I mean, sometimes in the therapy room as well, because that's sort of a situation where people are sort of quote unquote expected to be staring at each other. I will sometimes say to people, you know, are you a person who likes eye contact or a person who doesn't like eye contact? Feel free to not look at me.
Can you turn it on and or off? Like, if they're like, yeah, like, look me in the eye.
Well, I will usually, as a therapist, I will usually, you know, default to making eye contact unless that makes somebody uncomfortable. Okay. But I have done sessions where neither of us are looking at each other. We're just looking at a wall, and
it
that's
actually feels
more comfortable.
So intimate to me. I kind of realized the majority of our relationship, a lot of the time we would have conversations staring in different directions, and that actually feels really like I feel very seen when someone does that for me. Like, it makes me feel calm. I feel like I'm really present in the conversation.
Totally.
And however, I've dated some people who are like love eye contact, and that's been something that we really struggle with. They're like, this is how I read intimacy. This is how I feel connected to someone, and I'm like, this is gonna burn me out. Like, I can't give that to you.
And we all kind of have to decide, like, where is the line? You know, sometimes we prioritize being in a relationship over not being in a relationship. But sometimes, you know, we all have a different line to draw. That is, what are the hills I'm going to die on? Like, what are the places where I genuinely am not going to be able to tolerate this if I was in a long-term relationship with somebody? It's not that the other person's wrong. It's just that we have different needs, and those needs are so fundamentally different that it's an incompatibility.
Here's a Reddit user story on Meltdowns, which we found quite interesting. I'm after some advice from me and my partner on what we can do/change to lessen the impact of meltdowns. Here's an example scenario. I was overwhelmed by a change in expectations. I was told we were meant to be doing something within the hour, which I had thought was canceled, and had a pretty big meltdown. She started to call me and help, and so then I started explaining why I was melting down. I feel the need to justify the meltdown as they don't feel okay to have. So I was saying she could have told me things earlier, could have let me know, etc. Then she takes this hugely personally, says I'm blaming her. There's no intention of blame. I'm trying to explain why I'm melting down. She really doesn't cope with being blamed or feeling responsible. And so then she reacts with anger and gets wound up. Does anyone have any ideas or suggestions? Thanks for reading. This is posted by Spirited Broccoli 8260 Lynn, a Reddit thread for autism in women.
How do you kind of draw that line of like what is an appropriate ask to a partner, like what is for you to work on? Like, how do you avoid things going to kind of like a caretaker-y role and keeping things in like a healthy place, but also having your needs cared for? Like, that was a really difficult line for people to walk.
I mean, and, you know, and when we're with someone, presumably we're with them because we care about them, right? And so it's really hard to watch somebody struggling or in pain or, you know, having difficulty. So fully understand, you know, the impulse to caretake. One of the things that can be very helpful is that before you decide you know better what for this person, what they need than they do, is to ask them whether they want some support. And then to ask them what kind of support they want. And if they don't know what kind of support they want, to ask, would you like me to help you figure out what kind of support you need right now?
Because that would be really nice.
Right? Yeah. Because sometimes the impulse to caretake comes from our own discomfort. We're trying to make ourselves feel better because we are not comfortable being with somebody who is having a hard time. It's our own feelings that we're trying to manage. If I control the person, then I won't be uncomfortable anymore. I won't be, feeling anxious anymore or whatever it is. Right? So,
I never thought about it like that, but that does make sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes where we can overstep is actually when we feel an urgency to help someone, but the other person is not necessarily asking for it. We just want to just check ourselves and pause a moment and go, am I helping this person for them or am I helping this person for me?
It's a good question to ask.
Yeah. And so, and if we're with somebody and we ask them, would you like support? And they say no. What do we do about our own feelings about that? How do we stay with our own emotional response to that? Because sometimes it can feel like rejection. Then ties into all the stuff we were talking about previous about RSD.
I feel like that takes a lot of willpower and reflection all at the same time, because I feel like it's reflex or impulse to just make it better in the way that you think is best. And you really have to like, wait, no. Okay, what do they need? Like, what do they really need? And stopping yourself and asking that.
Yeah, and maybe I'll speak even to a little bit to shutdowns, because that tends to be my preferred way of, or what I've experienced in terms of like when I get to that point. And I mean, my friends will contact my partner to say, where am I? Because I will disappear and find everything dysregulating in terms of trying to reconnect. Like I cannot answer texts. I can't answer the phone. Emails pile up. And the longer that happens, the more anxiety it produces. And I think what has really helped with that is to tell my friends, sometimes I'm going to disappear. For periods of time, and it is not personal. And if it is personal, I will tell you, and we will have a conversation about it. But if I just drop off, I cannot function, and I will resurface as soon as I'm able to put myself back together.
Chapter 3, sex and intimacy.
All right. So first let's chat about the ADHD brain in bed and then the autistic brain in bed. And of course, it seems like we're all of them is what I'm learning about myself today. So you might just feel like you're relating to everything. I am an ADHD person who experiences hypersexuality and sexual risk-taking, but I didn't always know that these things were linked. And even when I did figure it out, I still got myself into like a lot of unsavory sexual situations. Our listeners also expressed that it's hard to tell what you're feeling in the moment, totally relate to that, before acting, which often leads to like big feelings of regret. Do you have any ideas on like what to do about it?
I mean, that is definitely a challenging one. I think, it might be helpful to have a menu of things that are stimulating that one can choose from. So, for example, so you're not necessarily telling yourself, no, I'm not going to have this experience, but you might say, okay, I might watch some porn, or I might flirt with this person, but then go home. I know that the impulsiveness can make it hard to press on a break long enough to think about, what the possibilities are. But even if you have in your wallet, a little card that says, here are 10 sexy things I could do, and then go, okay, which ones are less risky? So you're kind of looking at it from a perspective of like risk assessment and harm reduction. Maybe instead of going home with this person I don't know, I can call up the person that I occasionally sleep with and say, hey, can we meet up? Right. Or, so like, and that'll depend on the person and, what your particular proclivities are. But like to have thought through some options prior. So that if you're seeking the dopamine hit, it's you could still give yourself something, but it's not necessarily the thing that's going to make you wake up tomorrow morning and go, why did I just do that? Or I feel like I've been traumatized in some way.
Self-awareness was really important, like first like learning that this is what was happening. And I think honestly, like having my friends and you especially like calling me out. And I think I'm trying to pause longer, feel my body, you know, like what do I actually want in this moment? Like I love going to sex clubs. I really love it, but like hooking up with a stranger usually leads to like an unsafe scenario where I don't feel comfortable like saying yes or no. And I found like going only with like someone that I know and I've established trust with or with friends has been a safer way to explore that for sure.
I like to just say it out loud and then not do it.
What?
Like those videos.
So for real.
What do you mean?
Great idea. Yeah.
Like fantasies that I have.
Yeah.
I like to say it out loud to myself,
Can you
to
give an
my
example?
partner. To my partner, be like, oh, we're gonna go to this place and then we're gonna like pick somebody out, and then they're gonna come home with us. We don't do that. We don't do it. Maybe one day it'll happen, but well, no, it has not.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But like
Yeah,
in my mind.
Yeah, and fantasy is really the safest way to go anywhere. You can do anything in fantasy that you may not necessarily choose to do in real life because of safety reasons or whatever. But there's no harm, no foul if if everybody involved is consenting, then you can fantasize about whatever you want.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Role play.
And
Role play.
Role play is a scary stranger.
To your point about strangers, I did have a friend who went and they and their partner went to a bar, pretended to not know each other, and pretended to pick each other up.
That's
I've done that too.
And they had a great time.
Fun. And we have an whole episode about the psychology of kink where we talk more about role play, which you should check out if you're interested. On to the next thing. You're receiving. It feels so good. You're almost there. And then you notice the laundry basket. And now you're thinking about laundry. But then your brain jumps to whether you've been taking too long. And then you realize you've been distracted this whole time. So you start trying to look like you're really enjoying yourself. And then suddenly your partner's thinking, are they into this? Are they into me? What do we do? And this is a common ADHD sex experience. For people with ADHD, attention can wander during sex, which makes it harder to stay present and finish.
The worst is when your brain goes to like something about your family. And then you're like, oh, no.
What do we do about it?
So, one of the places where the masking can show up is that we feel like we have to look a certain way while we're having sex and perform in a certain way while we're having sex. And that's certainly not, exclusive to neurodiverse folks, but we can super do that also because we don't want to hurt our partner's feelings.
Yeah.
And before you know it, we're sort of masking, but we're checked out.
Yeah.
Right? Sex doesn't have to be serious. Sex doesn't have to be perfect. Sex is messy and awkward. It doesn't run like a porn film often ever. So the ability to kind of say, okay, what does sex look like for me if I'm not masking? If I could just be myself authentically in this moment with this other person, what would that look like? And
Take a little
it is
longer.
totally okay to zone out for a bit, and don't be afraid to pause, and don't be afraid to ask for something different. And all of that takes practice. I'm saying it like it's easy. It's not necessarily easy. And it takes trust and it takes safety and understanding that the person is not going to reject you if you pause the experience, right? So that might take some pre-conversations where you say, hey, I've been noticing it's sometimes hard for me to keep my focus. Is it okay if I stop you? And for the other person who's being asked this to not take it personally, because, it can be like you can take it in as a reflection of your skill or, like the other person doesn't like what you're doing or however it is, right? And it's not that. We don't know what it feels like to be in each other's bodies.
For sure. And I've really learned that. Okay. Before we get into what sex actually feels like in a differently wired body, stop what you're doing and listen closely because we are giving away free spicy toys or gift cards for toys to every single one of you. That's right. Everyone who signs up wins something from Bellesa.
If you haven't heard of Bellesa, let us put you on. They're a by women, for everyone company that's completely flipping the script on sexual wellness. And now they're hooking you up.
And you have to check out their LGBTQ plus collection. It's literally curated to celebrate everybody, every identity, and every kind of desire. I'm talking strap-ons, harnesses, couple-friendly vibes, all the fun stuff.
And can we talk about how their toys read like they were designed by somebody who understands a sensitive nervous system? We just spent a whole chapter on overstimulation, so hear us out.
You've definitely seen these viral toys all over your For You page. The Air Vibe is my absolute favorite toy because of its versatility. It gives dual stimulation, G-spot, and clit. It's waterproof, rechargeable, and best of all, It's silent but deadly, meaning no buzzing soundtrack for your brain to fixate on.
The thump, for example, vibrates, suctions, and thumps, of course. It's the toy that does it all, designed to replace every external vibe that you own, and it fits and charges in a discreet little carrying case.
In the Pebble, if you're into suction, which I absolutely am, then this is the toy for you. It has suction and vibration controlled independently, and it's ergonomically built to fit perfectly in your hand. And I need everyone to hear this. There's no annoying pattern modes. It's predictable and controllable.
And of course, we had to hook all of you up. Our friends at Bellesa and us are sending out free toys or gift cards for toys for everybody who signs up. You heard that right. Every single one of you wins something. Just click the link in the episode description or head to bbvibes.com/queercollective. That's bbvibes.com/queercollective.
Plus, these toys are perfect for low-demand intimacy and parallel play, which we're about to get into.
Real quick, if you want to stay up to date with current queer news and hot topics presented by queer journalists, we actually have the perfect podcast for you. It's called This News Is So Gay.
Hey, podcast listeners, I'm Ken Schneck, host of This News Is So Gay. This News Is So Gay is a weekly roundtable where LGBTQ+ journalists discuss issues at the forefront of national dialogue. We're covering hot-button queer news like healthcare and athletic bans for trans youth, defunding of federal HIV and AIDS programs, and general threats to queer public life. Think Meet the Press, but gayer. New episodes of This News Is So Gay drop every Wednesday morning. Find us on your favorite podcasting app.
All right, so this next section is sensory needs in bed. How do your autistic sensory needs show up in the bedroom?
One of the ways that I have managed, so largely unconsciously, my autistic sensory stuff before I figured out that I was autistic was that I've been into kink for as long as I can imagine. And so the framework of kink, which allows you to basically choose your own adventure and be able to say, these are the sensory experiences that I enjoy, and these are the sensory experiences that I do not enjoy, and to have that framework be respected has been just a godsend in terms of allowing me to have more of the kinds of experiences I want to have and less of the kind of experiences I don't want to have.
100%. Apparently, there's actually a very big overlap between the kink BDSM community and the autistic community.
Is there really?
Yeah.
This is making sense.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, like, if you think about other spaces that aren't like the kinky spaces, like social cues, body language, and reading someone's like enthusiasm is sometimes like part of consent, like in general. But if you move over to like the kink and BDSM space, it's very like direct consent, direct communication, verbal consent, or we come up with other kinds of cues like safe words.
You lay it out on the table.
Exactly. You think about the scene, and like a lot of people were saying like the communication being crystal clear just makes it feel so much like safer for them, and having the conversation before you play of like mapping out the scene of what is like what kinds of things could we do and what's off limits, what's on limits.
And having a safe word to opt out that nobody's going to take personally. For
Yes.
sure. To be able to stop, to be able to say, hey, actually, I'm not into this anymore, or whatever it is.
I think like especially the element of like enthusiastic consent and like thanking someone when they give you a no. I wanted to jump back to the autistic sensory needs because there was one comment that did get a lot of likes, which I'm guessing that means people were resonating with it. But a listener submitted their experience with autism in the bedroom and sensory needs. They say, I have AuDHD. When it comes to sex, I have a lot of trouble with bodily fluids, texture, and especially smell. It made me not want to have sex. With my last partner, it was a bit of an issue as they were extremely sexual and needed it. We did find some solution to oral by cutting a slit in a condom, but I still just don't like doing oral, even though things did improve and were safer that way. Thoughts? What do we do about this? Like, how can autistic folks balance and hold space for their own needs while maybe like experiencing a partner's conflicting desires?
The first thing that's really important is not forcing yourself to do something for your partner that fundamentally makes you feel really uncomfortable. Like, we all have things that we like doing. We have things that maybe we're neutral about, but we can do them for a partner if they're interested. And then we might have things that we absolutely cannot deal with in terms of physical experiences. And so being really honest with yourself is the first apart and not forcing yourself through experiences or to endure experiences that you are really suffering with and through. Because I think that's the first step to really kind of finding a solution, is going, you know what, there is no way that this can look okay for me. And then you can kind of go into, well, what are some other ways that this can happen? Just like you're saying about the condom, you know, is this something that we could maybe do some dirty talk about? Or is this something that we can watch a video of? Or is this something that we might outsource to someone else? Or
toys.
You know, toys. It's important for people to get their needs met, and it's important for us to not force ourselves to meet needs that we cannot meet.
And I think like get creative too. Like I would say the neurodivergent community, the kink community that overlap are so creative about like accommodations and like the way that you can play in the bedroom. And I would say like some things that have worked really well for me have been being in charge of the playlist. So it's like even, like are you playing kind of more like meditative music that's still like a nice vibe. But I find that helps me like with staying like grounded and calm. And I think telling a partner, like sometimes I have trouble verbally saying consent during sex. And I think like I like being able to just like tap someone, because like sometimes I get in my head, you know what I mean? And like being able to do that is really helpful as well. Another tool for folks as well that a lot of people were commenting about and wanted to have mentioned was AAC. Frankie, do you know about this?
What's AAC?
Have you heard of this? Do you want me to tell you about it? I'll tell you. So I learned about it in our comment section. So shout out to everyone who is a listener who was sharing this. But this is for folks to tap into, especially when they're experiencing kind of like an autistic shutdown. And I mean, you could use it in and out of the bedroom, I would say, but it is called AAC, and it's for nonverbal consent and communication in bed. It stands for Augmented and Alternative Communication, which is an umbrella term for other ways of communicating that isn't speech. And it can include gestures, facial expressions, symbols, pictures, writing. And it can be used by people who like need it sometimes, need it all of the time. I think there's this misconception that it's only for people who are like totally nonverbal, but I think it's even useful for people maybe who've had like sexual traumatizing experience. Like that's one of the reasons why I like to use like nonverbal things, you know?
Definitely, it's something that you can use. I recognize it, and a tool I sometimes give folks is if they do have sensory sensitivities and they're sort of trying to calibrate with a new partner, is to use like a 5-finger system. So, hold up one finger if you can't feel it at all. 2 fingers if it's like a little bit too light for you. 3 fingers if the sensation is perfect. 4 if it's starting to get a little bit too intense. 5 if it's too intense and they need to lower
For sure.
the calibration. And that way they don't have to speak, but can just, give a signal to their partner that adjusts the experience.
Yeah, which is so great. Yeah. And I'd also like to say one thing while I was kind of like researching these sensory issues is I found like there is a positive side to it. Because I think in our brains we can kind of frame it as like I have too many needs, like I'm a burden, which can like feel really hard. I think I feel that sometimes too when it's like, wow, I'm showing up to this relationship, I'm asking for so many things and it feels like the other person isn't asking for anything. That kind of sucks. But the positive side that I found, and I'd like to reframe it, is that it's potentially a sexual superpower, is what Science Direct was saying. They had a study on it. But it depends on the environmental load and a partner's responsiveness to your needs. So a 2026 study found that sensory difference can enrich closeness, not just constrain it. And the study found that having a diagnosis and reauthoring your sensory discomfort in the bedroom from self-judgments, like being picky, towards a needs-based understanding of sensory discomfort actually helps autistic people with self-identity development. And I would say like when I've had someone really see me in the bedroom and my needs and just be so fully accommodating, I'm like, I feel so connected to you right now. Like I feel like so relaxed. I feel so cared for.
Comfortable.
It
And then
feels
you
really good.
orgasm quicker.
Yeah.
And
100%.
bigger.
Yeah, totally. So the other thing I was thinking about that is that, when you were saying, we call them sensory issues. They're only issues in relation to something. So it becomes an issue if we feel like we're trying to perform some objective other person's idea of what this experience is supposed to look like. If we're trying to fit ourselves into a box that we don't fit in, then it becomes an issue. If we allow ourselves to be guided by our desire, regardless of what that looks like, and allow ourselves to sort of go into the individuality of what we might find exciting or interesting, then there is no issue. We're just following our own desire. It's when we try to fit into a box and we can't because it's not our genuine need, then it becomes an issue.
Yeah, around the shame, do you have any thoughts on kind of like how to manage that, I guess, like when you're showing up to the relationship with all of these elements?
Yeah. So, I mean, shame is one of the, so just to say, shame is when we feel that there is a part of ourselves that is not okay. And it's different from guilt, because guilt is when we feel that something we've done is not okay. Shame is like there is something fundamentally natural to me that shouldn't be there, right? So it can be very crippling in the sense that it can get in the way of us showing up authentically, showing up, with our full individuality and quirkiness and unmasked self. In terms of, dealing with it, naming it is often the first, because shame kind of exists. It likes to exist in the shadows. It likes to exist under a rug. When we lift the rug up and we go, yeah, there's some shame under there. It's sort of, it diffuses it somewhat. Being able to name it for yourself, first of all, and with a partner is also sort of, almost halfway there, because it does exist so much in it's kind of like where we go with it internally is, if I showed you this part of myself, you would not like or love me anymore. And how much in relationships, and especially in the beginning of relationships, do we take all of the parts of ourselves that we feel another person is not going to like or love and sweep it under the rug in the hopes that the other person will like the part we're showing them. But what that does then, it sets up a dynamic where, later on into the relationship, because we can't all, hide these things forever, it can show up, and it can show up with a lot of discomfort and a lot of embarrassment and a lot of humiliation. So making space for naming things, naming shame, identifying what shame feels like in the body, seeing if we can stay with that sensation, breathing into it, naming it to another person, saying to, if you have somebody you trust, to be able to say, hey, I want you to know that I'm afraid that if I tell you about this part of myself, that you will reject me. And so I just want to name that. And if you're feeling even braver, you could say, I would like to share with you this part of myself that I feel shame about, so that it can be named and out in the air. And so I don't have to carry it myself alone anymore. And sometimes that can be a profoundly, profoundly healing thing, because we invest so much energy in keeping our shame, or the things that we feel shame about, suppressed.
Yeah. Which I think ties into, all of it is tied together. I feel like it ties into the masking, the rejection sensitivity,
Absolutely.
like all of them mixed in together.
Yeah.
That's a great place to end it. Now, before we wrap it up, you have something to shout out, something to plug?
Yeah, absolutely. So if anyone is looking for a neurodiversity affirming therapist, I do offer individual one-on-one sessions. My website is www.gestaltwithfrankie.com. That's GESTALTWITHFRANKIE.com, and or you could find me on Psychology Today under Frankie Talon Rose.
A reminder to our listeners to check out our wonderful sponsors from today, Field, Beducated, and Tomboy X. Their links are in the show notes or in the description down below.
And if you like our work, you like what we do, you want ad-free episodes, you want extra content, you want our research, we also have a Patreon. You can check it out in the description down below. So that's everything that we have for you today. And if you want to dive deeper into a spicy topic that we talked about today, which is the psychology of kink, we have a whole episode on it. You can go check it out. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast app, make sure to leave us a 5-star review, because it really does help the channel out. That's everything that we have. And until next time, peace.